A bank that never closed, not for bombs, not for blitzkriegs, not even for genocide. While soldiers bled across Europe, a quiet building in a neutral Swiss city kept its doors open and its books balanced for every side of the Second World War. Inside its vaults sat melted gold. Some of it came from looted national treasuries. Some of it, investigators would later suspect, came from something far darker. This is the hidden story of the bank that called itself neutral, while bankrolling the Third Reich. Welcome back to the Sheru Files, where the stories history tried to bury come back into the light. Today, we step into the marble hallways of global finance, where presidents, Nazi officials, and Allied bankers once sat across the same table, smiling. To understand this story, we have to go back further than the war itself. The year is 1930. The First World War has been over for more than a decade, but its wounds are still being paid for, literally. Germany owes the victors of that war a staggering sum in reparations. To manage this endless flow of payment, the world's major powers create something unusual, a bank that belongs to no single nation. They call it the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, a city famous for one thing above all: staying out of other people's wars. On paper, the BIS exists to collect Germany's war debts and funnel them to the Allied nations. In reality, it becomes something far stranger. Imagine an institution owned jointly by the central banks of nations that within a decade will be trying to destroy each other. The Bank of England, the Bank of France, the Reichsbank of Germany, all shareholders, all sitting on the same board, all profiting from the same dividends. It sounds almost too strange to be true, but it gets stranger. By the early 1930s, the BIS isn't just collecting German war debts. It's investing heavily inside Germany itself, pouring in capital to help rebuild the very economy that started the First World War. 3/5 of its original startup funds, hundreds of millions in Swiss gold francs, get funneled directly into German reconstruction. Now think about that for a moment. The victors of the First World War are essentially financing their own reparations by lending money to a bank which then invests that same money back into Germany, which uses it to eventually pay interest back to the very people who lent it. A closed loop. A financial Ouroboros swallowing its own tail. And one man in Berlin watches this loop very, very closely. His name is Hjalmar Schacht, the Nazi Minister of Economics. To him, the BIS isn't a relic of old war debts. It's a lifeline, a back door to international trade that could remain open, no matter what happens next. Few people watching the rise of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s could have guessed that a sleepy Swiss bank would become one of its most valuable tools. But here's the shocking part. When Adolf Hitler seizes power in 1933, the BIS doesn't pull away from Germany. It doesn't sever ties. Instead, one of its own founding directors, a respected Jewish banker named Karl Melchior, is forced out of his position, quietly, without resistance from his fellow directors. The bank that was supposed to represent neutral apolitical finance has just made its first compromise with the Nazi regime. It will not be its last. Picture the boardroom in Basel as the 1930s become the 1940s. An American banker presides over the meetings, a Harvard-educated, deeply conservative financier named Thomas McKittrick. Beside him sits a French general manager, and working quietly through the bank's daily operations is a German assistant manager, a committed member of the Nazi Party. Among the directors, two men who will one day stand trial as war criminals, the vice president of the Reichsbank, and the very president of the Reichsbank himself, the man who would later show dinner guests around vaults stacked with looted treasure. British bankers work alongside them too, throughout the entire war. Let that sink in. While British soldiers die fighting the Nazi war machine on battlefields across Europe, British financial officials are sitting in meetings with the men running Hitler's central bank. Officially, this is described as preserving important international financial relationships. Unofficially, it's something far more uncomfortable to admit. The first real scandal breaks in March of 1938. German tanks roll into Prague. Nazi officers storm the offices of the Czech National Bank and hold its directors at gunpoint. Their demand: hand over the nation's entire gold reserve, tens of millions of dollars worth. The Czechs think they've found an escape route. They explain that the gold has already been transferred to the BIS in Basel, on its way to safekeeping in London at the Bank of England. The Nazis don't back down. They simply order the Czechs to request the gold be sent back to Basel. And here is the moment that should chill you. The governor of the Bank of England, a man widely known to be sympathetic toward Hitler's Germany, quickly agrees. The gold is returned, then it's quietly forwarded on to Berlin. Stolen treasure, laundered through the very heart of British and Swiss banking, and delivered straight into Nazi hands. When a member of the British Parliament discovers what happened and confronts the Prime Minister directly, asking if it's true that Czechoslovakia's national treasure has been handed to Germany, the Prime Minister looks him in the eye and says, "It is not. It was a lie, and not everyone in London was fooled." Winston Churchill, then a backbench critic of his own government, erupts in anger in the House of Commons, accusing British officials of cowardly compliance with the Nazis. But the gold is already gone. September 1939. Germany invades Poland. World War II has officially begun. Most people watching from the outside assume the BIS, this strange shared bank between warring nations, will simply collapse, or at least suspend its operations completely. It doesn't. The bank announces it has paused formal board meetings. But behind closed doors, officials from warring nations keep meeting anyway, calling it, in their own words, a sort of club. Imagine that. Civilized conversations, polite handshakes, wine poured at dinner, happening in a quiet Swiss boardroom, while at the very same moment, just across the border, the machinery of the Holocaust is grinding into motion. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, keeps sending payments to the BIS throughout the entire war. Interest on old loans. Obligations dating back to the previous World War. For years, historians wondered why the Nazis bothered honoring debts from a conflict they were trying to erase from memory while waging an entirely new one. The answer turns out to be brutally practical. The Nazis believed maintaining good relations with the BIS gave them a financial back channel to the rest of the world, a way to convert assets into hard currency, even while most of Europe was closed to them through war. And crucially, it gave them a way to pay for things in gold when nothing else would be accepted. Now, here's where the story turns from uncomfortable to deeply disturbing. Some of the gold the Nazis used to make these interest payments wasn't sitting peacefully in German vaults before the war. It had been looted, stolen from the national gold reserves of nations the Nazis had invaded, Belgium, the Netherlands, and others. To hide its origin, the gold was melted down and reformed into fresh bars stamped with false pre-war German markings. A disguise, a laundering operation hidden inside a respected international bank. After the war, investigators with access to Reichsbank and German mint records would be able to trace roughly a dozen tons of gold sent to the base during this period. Of that total, several tons were conclusively identified as looted, stolen primarily from the national banks of Belgium and the Netherlands. But it's the unanswered question that haunts this story the most. Officials connected to the case were later asked directly, did this looted gold ever include material extracted from concentration camp victims? Gold pulled from dental work, melted wedding rings, personal valuables stripped from people before their deaths? The honest answer, even decades later, was unsettling. It is extremely difficult to trace. The gold could have been mixed, remelted, blended with other sources before it ever reached Switzerland. No one can say with absolute certainty. But the men running German gold operations during the war, men who personally certified shipments as clean before they were accepted by Swiss banking institutions, knew exactly where their nation's wealth was coming from by that point in the war. Did the leadership of the WWII know too? There's no smoking gun, no signed confession. But ask yourself this: how do the most senior bankers in the world, men whose entire careers are built on tracking the movement of money and metal across borders, fail to notice where an avalanche of gold is suddenly coming from, in the middle of the most destructive war in human history? When the war ends in 1945, the world begins reckoning with what happened. An international commission is formed specifically to investigate looted monetary gold and arrange its return. Investigators get access to German banking and mint records. By comparing shipment numbers and physical assay records, they're able to identify several tons of the gold received by the BIS as definitively looted, mostly traced back to Belgium and the Netherlands. The bank is forced to return a portion of what it accepted. But here's the part that should make your blood boil just a little. The president of the BIS during the war doesn't face serious consequences. He doesn't go to prison. He doesn't even lose his standing in the financial world. Instead, he walks straight into a senior position at one of America's largest banks. When he dies decades later, a major American newspaper publishes a respectful obituary, celebrating him as a distinguished figure in global finance. His extensive wartime cooperation with Nazi officials goes almost entirely unmentioned. Meanwhile, some of his former colleagues, the actual Reichsbank officials who oversaw the looting and laundering operations, do face justice. They stand trial. Some receive lengthy prison sentences. One man's personal life unravels entirely under the weight of what he had been part of. But the institution itself, the BI, survives. After the war, there's even a serious push at an international economic conference to dissolve the bank permanently, viewing it as a symbol of compromised wartime cooperation with the enemy. Powerful voices intervene to save it, arguing the world will need an institution like this to help rebuild global finance. The motion to shut it down fails. The BIS lives on. Today, the Bank for International Settlements still exists, It no longer manages stolen gold or wartime communications. Its modern mission is far more mundane, promoting cooperation and stability between the world's central banks. In the 1970s, it moved into a striking circular tower that now dominates the skyline of Basel. Its directors still gather there, still hold meetings, still discuss the technical machinery of global finance. Walk past that building today and you'd never guess what happened inside its predecessor decades earlier. You'd never guess that, while the world burned, men in suits sat calmly around a table, citizens of nations at war with each other, discussing interest rates and gold shipments like nothing outside those walls mattered at all. It raises an uncomfortable question that goes far beyond one bank, one war, or one moment in history. When money is involved, does loyalty to a nation ever truly outweigh loyalty to profit? And if a financial institution can quietly serve both sides of the deadliest conflict in human history, what else right now, hiding behind respectable boardroom doors, are we choosing not to look at too closely? If this story shook you the way it shook us researching it, you're not alone. History is full of these quiet, uncomfortable truths, the ones that never make it into the headlines, but shape the world we live in today. If you want more hidden stories like this one, brought to life with the same care and depth, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss the next file we open. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Should an institution like this have ever been allowed to survive the war? Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Sheru Files. We'll see you in the next one.